Good evening and welcome to the City of Topeka Planning Commission meeting. We are a commission appointed by the mayor and city council to plan for the orderly growth and development of the community, to hold public hearings, and to make recommendations to the city council on planning items. Please note that the city council rules state that the public hearings for planning cases shall be conducted solely by the planning commission. No additional public hearings will be conducted by the city council. Tonight's case is tentatively scheduled to be heard by the city council next month. Agendas can be found at topeka.org. For cases that require public hearings, the procedure will be as follows. First, the planning department staff will summarize the case. Next, we will hear from the applicant or the representative. Then we will receive public testimony. Public comments should be addressed solely to the chair and are limited to 4 minutes. Chris, please take roll.
Mr. Armstrong?
Here.
Mr. Dean?
Here.
Mr. Freed?
Here.
Mr. Kanar?
Here.
Mr. Kalp?
Here.
Ms. Lawson?
Here.
Ms. Messina?
Here.
Ms. Ringler?
Here.
And Mr. Warner.
Here.
We have 9 and a quorum.
Thank you. Quick acknowledgement that we do have a new commissioner on our panel up here, Tim Kopp. He's very welcome, and I overheard that he has some experience on planning commissions, correct?
A few years, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So he knows the ropes. We will start off with approval of minutes from our September 16th, 2019 meeting. Is there any changes, corrections, comments that we need to make before we hear a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
A motion?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Chris, would you please take a vote?
Mr. Armstrong?
Abstain.
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Abstain.
Mr. Kanar?
Aye.
Mr. Kalp?
Abstain.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye. Yes.
Ms. Messina?
Aye.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
And Mr. Warner.
Abstain.
Motion passes 5-0 with 4 abstaining.
Are there any declarations of conflict of interest or ex parte communications by members of the commission or staff this evening? Hearing none, we'll proceed to our public hearings agenda item. Z1908 by Shamrock Valley Ventures LLC, and Ms. Driver will present that.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairman. The applicants have requested a zoning change from the O&I2 Office and Institutional District to the N2 Multiple Family Dwelling District. Property is located at 921 Southwest 10th Avenue along the south side of 10th Street. The applicants need the rezoning so they can remodel the existing 2,000 square foot, 2-story, single-family residence for either a duplex or a triplex. Some of the previous uses of the building included in the past residential office uses, upholstery repair, and appliance repair. Currently, there is a pending zoning violation on the property for using the building as for appliance repair. Applicants are in the process of correcting that violation by removing equipment and outside storage from the property as well as a sign. Any further court action is on hold pending action on the rezoning by the City Council. The structure was constructed around 1910 as a single-family residence. The zoning case in 1965 rezoned the property from the multiple family dwelling district to the E multiple family dwelling district to allow either multi-family residential uses or office uses along the frontage of 10th. Historic records indicate that the structure was used as a law office in 1992 at the time the zoning was changed to O&I2. All the uses since that time aren't readily known. Staff is aware the property was used for both upholstery repair and appliance repair, which are not allowed in the O&I2 zoning district. Applicant subject property is not located within a historic district, as you can see from the map, which is the historic districts in Holiday Park are shaded in green on the aerial. The Applicant conducted a neighborhood information meeting as required on Monday, October 28th. Those meeting notes from the applicant are attached. The Historic Holiday Park NIA has not expressed any formal opposition to the zone change. The surrounding area along 10th Street is characterized by a mix of office and residential structures along the south frontage of 10th Street. The north side of 10th Street contains parking lots, large institutional uses. Properties along the south side of 10th are zoned O and I2 Office and Institutional District and N3 Multiple Family Dwelling District, contain a mix of residential uses, multifamily and single-family office uses and parking lots. The proposed zoning is in conformance to the future land use map of the Historic Holiday Park Neighborhood Plan, which is there. It designates the south side of 10th Avenue for office and residential uses. The purpose of that category, which was adopted in the neighborhood plan, was to recognize the area along the frontage of 10th Street for both office and residential uses on the edge of a single-family neighborhood. The proposed zoning to accommodate a duplex or triplex on the property is suitable considering its location on the exterior of the neighborhood along the frontage of 10th Street, where there's also other higher density housing, office uses, parking lots, and institutional use. Property does have space available in the rear, accessible from the alley for the addition of parking for a duplex or a triplex. Staff is recommending approval. The applicants are here to answer questions that you may have. I am open for questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the commissioners?
Yeah, Mr. Driver, in the note summary from the public meeting, talks about recommendations to either change M2 zoning to R2 or to allow R2 along with, can you talk, second page on the back
okay.
there? And I'm guessing, was that Karen Hiller, maybe city councilwoman that was present at their meeting?
The city council person that was present, yes, was Karen Hiller.
Okay.
That's correct.
Any other questions for staff?
No, that was a question. Are they considering R2 zoning, or is M2, as you stated?
They applied for the M2 zoning, and we are recommending approval of M2.
Does that
So
include R2 as well? Is it an overlapping?
They would allow them to do a single-family residence in M2 if that's what they chose. So they did not change their application. They did not formally change their application to R2, to rezone it to R2.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? That's all?
Ms. Driver, the staff report talks about duplex or triplex, and the square footage of the property certainly is adequate for the duplex, but I think it comes out to like 2.5 units if you do the math. So in order to get a triplex, would they have to get a variance, or does the city round up from that figure?
Are you referring to the density requirement in the
right.
code?
And it's noted in the report that
Right.
to get 3 apartments, you'd have to be up to, well, it allows a density of 18 units per acre, but the size of that, the 1.17 acres, I think only allows, the duplex is the only thing that falls within that dimension
Commissioner,
cleanly.
I'm going to try to answer that question. So it's not clear to me that you can apply for a variance for a density standard. That's probably, I've never seen that done. It is of dimensional nature. It's not, I don't think it's a use standard. If it's considered a use standard, you can't apply to the BZA for a variance for that. There has been some discussion amongst staff when we update the code to increase the density that's allowed in the M2 district, because of the intent of the M2 district really is for garden apartment densities, and 15 is, that's fairly restrictive when you look at what type of densities you get with a garden apartment type product.
Will this property owner be able to do a triplex without any further action by the city if this is approved? for
Currently,
M2?
no. Currently, no.
Okay.
Just would not, the something would have to change with respect to the
So
density
the
standards.
triplex language in the report is subject to, if there's a future revision to the dimensional
I'd say
requirement.
that's true, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff at this point? Okay. Would the owner or the owner's representative like to come forward and say anything at this point?
Not much more to add. I guess regarding what your questions were with,
Please
Yeah.
state your name.
my name's Casey McLennan. I'm one of the owners of Shamrock Valley Ventures. Kevin Stoltz is also one of the owners. We're both here this evening. Just to clarify a little bit about the zoning piece that you'd asked about, we had some discussion. I'm the one that took those notes and submitted them. There was some discussion whether it was M2 or R2. The spirit of what we want to do is put it into a duplex. There's 2 units. It makes sense to be 2 units the way it's laid out with an ensuite on there. So right now, the questions were in I guess the line of questioning, which you had come up with, is similar to what we dealt with on the October 28 meeting, about what it looks like in the future if we do sell this or if something happens in the future, what becomes of the zoning. But what we're going to do is, through the permitting department, we're going to apply for a permit to put this into a duplex. That's the spirit of what we're doing. So it's in rough shape. It's sat there for a very long time in disrepair, and I think we've got a real opportunity to make this thing look very good. That's what our goals are. If you got any questions, I'd be happy to try to address them.
Any questions for the owner at this point? Go ahead.
So, just so I'm clear on it, your intent is a duplex, and
Yep.
that's great. I think you're probably making a great improvement on the property. But with the M2, you could tear the building down and sell it to somebody, and they could put a triplex in, if you could meet the dimensional
So
requirements.
the way I understand it, maybe Mike has, an M2 can fit a duplex, an R2 maybe can fit a duplex. Is that correct?
Commissioner, an R2, I think there was some confusion on here about
Okay.
the R2, mention the R2. The R2 is really a single-family residential district.
Okay.
So the M1 is the zoning that would be zoning for duplexes.
Okay.
And that's a step down from the M2.
Yeah. There was some issue with that, though, wasn't there, when we talked about this, I thought?
About,
The M1
I don't-
versus M2. The
Well,
property right next to
yeah.
it is M2, right? The one right directly next to it is an M2.
it's actually M3.
Sorry, M3.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think the thought is that certainly, based on what you just said, M1 would meet your needs if all you end up doing is a duplex. M2 is something that staff was willing to recommend support of because of the adjacent zoning and also the policy language in the plan, the land use plan.
And I don't know about tearing it down in the future or anything like that. That's not our plans.
I got you.
All right.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks.
I'd like to open this up for a public hearing. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this agenda item tonight? Come forward if you'd like to. Please state your name.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me. My name is Jennifer Anderson, and I live at 1025 Southwest Fillmore Street, so we are sort of catty corner to the property. I was in attendance of the neighborhood meeting and just wanted to reiterate some things that I, felt like we heard and agreed upon, and then state a couple of concerns. It was my understanding at that meeting that, these guys want to, make the property better than it is, which I very much appreciate. And that we all sort of agreed that ideally, because of density concerns, that if it was a 2-family unit, that would be agreeable to everybody if the zoning is going to change. As a homeowner in Holiday Park and of 6 years, it's my understanding that in the past we've gone through a down zoning, that our neighborhood is part of a core area that is at risk, and we want to increase the attractiveness of Topeka and this area. And it's my concern that if we go ahead and move forward with an M2 approval, that we're setting precedences for other properties in Holiday Park, and it's going to allow potential upzoning in other areas, which I'd really like to avoid. So my request would be that the M2 is denied and that we move forward with an R1 or M1, whatever states very clearly that it becomes a two-family dwelling.
Are there any questions for the speaker? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this item?
Hi there, I'm Patrick DeLapp. I live in the neighborhood also. I do not want the zoning change. There is some contention, maybe allowing a duplex, but I don't think an M2 is gonna do it. Is there an R3 that will restrict them to only that? Here's the problem. I don't like how the reports work at all. I think it's biased. The pictures you show the property, that's almost 4 years old. Why is it almost 4 years old? Do we not have a budget for a camera to take more recent pictures? Maybe it's because of the fact that the property looks absolutely horrible. They have a dark colored blue, but they painted the house, probably free paint they got. They have appliances in the back. Matter of fact, code compliance on the 5th of this month served a warrant to seize property in the backyard to do it. They weren't able to move the shipping container because they didn't know how to. They didn't have the equipment for that. Inconsistencies are in the report too. For example, you have been told that, let me get this thing right. You've been told on page 6 that the existing building has not been used or converted to an office in 20 years since the zoning change allowed it. Not true. On another page, there was a rental management property on page 4, 2011. Well, here we're saying it hasn't been used in 20 years. 2011 wasn't 20 years ago. What my fear is, it will be rented out to anybody and everybody who has money for the week. They have that problem right now. Big fights are going on with the neighbor across the street because of the way they've kept the property. They only bought it $14,000. They did not do their due diligence in finding out what the property was things. They're coming here without even a good plan of how we're going to change this into a duplex. We're just kind of feeling you out and want the change. Where's the architect's plans? What's it going to look like? I want my neighborhood to be continued the way it is, not to be torn down, which my fear, the current owners have shown nothing but disrespect for the neighborhood. They can make more money as it's currently zoned than a duplex. Why is that? Commercial property sells well. Find, again, a rental management property to operate their office out of there, find an attorney, find a tax accountant that could do it. They pay a lot more than it costs to rent a home they're going to live in. You're allowed to have if I understand the zoning properly, they're allowed to have a rental unit upstairs. And then down below you can have the office. There's another property that is doing that, zoned the same thing, and they're fine. Matter of fact, it makes it a little bit confusing for the tax of the county. The appraiser, because he's got to know what percentage of the building you're using for either one. Turn it down, or turn this thing back and have better plans, have more updated pictures than are 4 years old, and have accurate information that respects consistency throughout this plan. Any questions for me?
Any questions for the speaker right now?
None?
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who'd like to address this? No.
Hello, I am Chris Meinhardt, resident and owner of
Mr.
property.
Meinhardt, can you scoot over to
Yes,
the speaker?
yes. Hello, I'm Chris.
This one over here.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Chris Meinhardt, resident and owner of property located in the official notice area. And I may be repeating some of your concerns and others. I hope you can filter through this. I'd prefer to read. This zoning change would increase the density of allowable dwelling units on this lot above what the current lot size allows. Although the increase is called slight, justification to allow for this variance here or in any part of the city has not been considered. Here, the number of allowable units would increase by 33%. And as I understand from your packet information, the number of allowable new occupants from 10 to 15. Related is that the offered comparison for proposed transitional zoning is based in relation to just a single adjacent lot zoned M3. This does not describe for you the majority of other adjacent as well as surrounding lots zoned for unit density 2 steps less than M3. These adjacent lots are R1 and M1. According to the city's published zoning district summary, it seems that the appropriate transitional zoning for the subject lot, if based on the zoning of the majority of the area residential lots, is thus M1, not M2 as proposed. The owner has stated in meeting minutes here in your review packet that the density lower than M2 is agreeable. I acknowledge the owner's desire to use the property for residential purposes. This seems most fair. However, the proposed variance for higher unit density than is allowed seems dissimilar in physical context. The added increase of residential units and accompanying added increase in total allowed occupants would be substantial for this lot and for surrounding residential property. I continue to rely on current zoning parameters when I consider the costs of maintenance of my nearby property. This type of consideration impacts the value of our real estate tax base. It is not an opinion that the surrounding lower density residential property is likely to suffer in value from the proposed higher density than is allowed. The city's formal downzoning of residential property nearby is evidence of the city's standing recognition of adverse effects of higher density residential zoning on surrounding lower density residential zoning. I ask that you refer the application back to staff for additional consideration and a definition of transitional zoning that relates with the majority of surrounding and adjacent property. Thank you.
Any questions for the speaker? Mr. Hall?
Sir, I may have missed it in your statement, but what are you asking for the planning commission to do? What would be your desired outcome?
To send it back for further consideration and definition of some of the matters that you have brought up tonight and others, or I don't prefer it, to deny the application, because I think the owner's desire to use the property for residential use is good, but I just don't think that this is likely to result in a limit of 2 units per this particular lot. As they've mentioned, if they should sell the property, it will allow 3. And that would be until the city may increase the density, as you've asked and has been noted. Well, I guess I'm just not quite satisfied with what I've heard, that the current limit on density would be upheld.
But are you thinking, is it your thinking that the use of the property for residential purposes is preferable to non-residential, or where are you on that?
I don't have a preference. I do respect the owner's desire to use it for his residential, but I don't have a preference.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the speaker?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak to this agenda item?
Good evening. My name is Nell Sanderson. I live at 1025 Southwest Fillmore Street, left-hand side of the road. Yellow, 3 or 4 houses down on the left, opposite side of the street. I just want to acknowledge, one, that the owners have done a great job in getting the house up to speed. Compared to what it was, it does look remarkably better, albeit the color palette could change considerably, is my opinion. I do feel like it's not really in keeping with the neighborhood. However, you know what? At least it's painted and it's not degrading, so that's great news. And I appreciate them taking the time, effort, and energy to get it painted and whatnot. And so that is remarkable in consideration to what it was prior. I'm in agreement with Chris. I think it should be M1. I feel like if you give someone more rope at a later date, it could be torn down and possibly have 3 as opposed to 2 dwellings in there, and that's just something I'm not interested in. I feel like the M1's the right way to go. I feel like a duplex is perfect for the situation. They've even expressed the exact same sentiment. I'm in full agreement, even as a single-family residential owner right in the neighborhood, and I feel like that's reaching across the table and making it work for both parties. That's what they want. That's what we want. M1 seems to be the way to go, unless I'm missing something. So I just want to say thank you all very much for your time, effort, and energy for coming here tonight, listening to everybody. I really appreciate it. I don't have anything else.
Are there any questions for the speaker? I appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Have a great night.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this agenda item? Okay, hearing none, I'll close the public hearing portion of this item. Discussion by the commission. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess just a little clarification on M2 versus M1. It sounded like our definition of M2 was that there can only be 2 units. And that's the same definition of M1? I'm not sure what we're arguing. Even a future tear down and rebuild can't get more than 2 because of current density requirements?
That's correct. Under the current standards, you'd be limited to 2 units.
Unless they acquire bigger,
Unless they acquire more
they
property.
acquire the property next door.
I was going to say that's because that's related to the size of the lot. Correct.
Right, correct. The lot is 0.17 of an acre, and that equates, when you take 15 units per acre, that equates to 2.55 if you do the math. So staff's thinking on this M2 zoning is that it's more consistent with the zoning that fronts on 10th. And that was the purpose of our recommendation. That was the basis of our recommendation.
And the difference between it and M1?
The main difference is M1, you're limited to 2 units on a zoning lot, on a lot. And with M2, you're allowed greater density. You're allowed a certain number of units in a building. And so it's really a step up, going from duplexes to apartment zoning. So medium density apartment zoning. Medium density, that's kind of a subjective term, but if you think garden apartments, like 2-floor, 3-story garden apartments, that's kind of, that's the nature of M2. Something more dense, mid-rise apartments, we're talking M3.
So I guess the question is still, so this is hypothetical, but 10 years from now, the building is torn down and they wanted to build a 3-story apartment building. They could not, unless there was a change in the density standard, there could not be that put there because it would be too dense for that size of lot, even though the building would allow it.
So if they wanted to build more than 2 units on the property, they would not be able to do that unless there's a change in the standard, the density standard, or if they acquire more property. There's a height standard also, and I don't think that's going to limit them in any substantial way. The height limit is 42 feet. 50 feet in M2, 42 feet in, 45 feet in M1, or excuse me, 42 feet in M1, 50 feet in M2. 42 is pretty tall. I mean, you can get 3 stories in 42 feet.
Questions?
If they were to acquire more property in the future, the adjacent property is M3 right next to it.
Right.
Which is the way it is up and down the south side of 10th Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
So this particular zoning lot, what they're doing right now with just 2 units is fine. So
Correct.
That's the maximum they can do. And
That's the maximum
if
they
they
can
want to
do.
acquire
The
more,
proposed zoning.
they're not going to be able to go south across the alley.
That's
They can only-
correct.
They can only, and they're not going to be able to go across the street. They'd have to go to the east,
And
which is already M3.
Correct.
Yeah.
So also, the neighborhood plan is pretty clear in limiting that part of the neighborhood to the south
Right.
to single family. I believe does that correct?
I know from looking at neighborhood plans in the past, it is pretty typical that you see these buffer zones at the edges where there's like arterial streets between the residential and the like institutional uses that as you go north, where it gets a little bit more intensive and stuff. There other questions? You had a question? No? Okay. Okay. Other questions or comments, discussion?
Help me out on this, in terms of the neighborhood plan, it was R2 equally acceptable, consistent with the neighborhood plan?
On this lot,
Right.
I wouldn't say R2 is. No. Yeah.
It's not consistent with the plan?
Correct. Correct.
Okay, can you give me a 10-word reason why? I don't doubt you, I just want an explanation.
Yeah, I think there's, as Chairman alluded to, there's a buffer where it's a balancing along that buffer line between, you don't want to make it too restrictive, or else you're not going to get something occupied. We don't want vacant buildings, we want an occupied use. This is more than 10 words. So if you limit it to R1 or R2, for instance, chances are, first of all, that's not going to be developed for a single-family use. Chances are better if you allow two units in there because of the nature of the intensity along the street. So the higher you go up in allowed intensity, the more chance you have to have a successfully developed, profitable land use on that property, which is what we're all after. We just want it to be compatible with what's around it. So
Well, I've got that, but what the applicant is talking about doing with the property is the duplex, and that's all that can be done with the property right now. And there is R2 property nearby, and there was discussion at the neighborhood meeting. So I'm just trying to get past that, Bill, as to what.
Sure. I think you probably know the term spot zoning. If we were to rezone this to an R2, this would be considered a spot zoning because what is on either side of it is not a similar zoning. And to the south of it really is no bearing on the relationship of land use. When you go south, you're in a whole other block. So you're looking at the block as to what is that uniformity of zoning. If you were to rezone it to R2, I would say then rezone the whole block to R2. I don't think we haven't been asked that, but you're asking me anything that is uncharacteristic of the zoning on that block, i.e. spot zoning, you really should look at that block in its totality as to what is the property. If it's not proper to have M1 if it's not proper to have M2 on the corner, then why is the rest of the block allowed to have M2 or M3, which is what is proposed, or what is existing, I should say. So you have a higher zoning on that block than you would have if you were to recommend something of a single or two.
Well, in response to what neighbors are saying tonight, the short answer is that given the dimensions of the property, no more intense use can be made under M2 than under R2, absent a future change in the dimensional maximums.
M1.
Yeah, M1.
M1 versus M2.
Right.
M1 and M2, not R2. R2,
Well, the R2 was what was discussed at the neighborhood meeting.
yeah, but I think that was,
It's a typo. I meant, yeah. That discussion in the neighborhood meeting notes, it was intended to indicate should allow M1 zoning, which is duplex zoning. M1 is our duplex only zoning district.
because R2.
So that's what they meant.
R2 would
is
not
single
allow.
family. There's 3 different types of single family based on the setbacks.
Okay, so the notes from the neighborhood meeting, it would be more accurate to say M1 to M1, M2 instead of M2, R2.
Yeah.
Okay,
M1.
all right. That helps. Thank you.
M1.
I mean, just from looking strictly at the plan, the neighborhood plan, the future land use map there, I understand the reasoning for what staff's recommending. Kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other in my mind, a little bit about the M1, M2, but given the restriction on the lot, I don't know that it matters. Anybody else feel strongly about it?
Well, and I think it's also clear that with the alley running behind these lots, before you get to the rest of the residential lots, it's clearly designed that it's separate and not being treated the same as those, recognizing that buffer zone as well. And with a consistency of M3 on that same block and the next 2 blocks down, I think the recommendation, I see it as consistent with the plan and how properties on the frontage road of 10th Avenue are different than properties inside on Fillmore, once you get in single residential. And I think that I see it as the recommendation is consistent with all of that.
I would comment that had the application been for M1, I would have voted in favor of that. With it as M2, I think that's also consistent. It's a question that they both may be appropriate. In the long term, having it as M2, especially if there is consideration of a density increase, you're looking at down the line having to answer the question again when someone wants to sell it and develop it competitive with other similarly situated lots. And when you look at the frontage of 10th Street at M2, it's the most restrictive on that side of the street. Everything else is M3, so I don't see the issue. I understand that people in the neighborhood don't want it, and I understood if I lived there, I might not either, but based on the plan and the request that's been made, I'm in favor of it.
I did have one question for staff just to address one of the concerns that was brought up. Is it typical of planning, or rezoning that any kind of architectural drawings are requested or required?
No, it's not. It would, for a couple reasons. If there were drawings, because it's straight zoning, they're not compelled to follow that drawing.
Any other questions, comments, discussion amongst the commissioner?
Madam Chair, I just have one question for Mrs. Driver. That 2 houses to the east, how many dwelling units, do you know by chance, that one has?
The one, you mean
big white-
there's an apartment building, 2
Oh.
properties to the east, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
I am not sure, because I know it's an apartment complex there.
Okay.
The-
Like more than 5?
The applicants might know. I think it's at least 4.
It's a 3-story and
4, and it's 3 stories.
2 per floor. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions or discussion? Anyone feel comfortable making a motion at this point?
Based on the findings and analysis of the staff report, I move to recommend to the governing body approval of the reclassification of the property from ONI 2 Office and Institutional District to M2 Multiple Family Dwelling District.
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Chris, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Armstrong,
Aye.
Mr. Dean,
Aye.
Mr. Freed,
Aye.
Mr. Canar,
Aye.
Mr. Kelp,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson,
Aye.
Ms. Messina,
Aye.
Ms. Ringler,
Aye.
Mr. Warner.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0, or I'm sorry, 9-0.
Thank you. That concludes the public hearing session of the agenda tonight. We are now going to hear some presentations from staff, and Mr. Warner, I believe, is first.
Okay, good evening, Commissioners. I'm going to talk to you about the city's land use and growth management plan.
Can I jump, I'm sorry, can I jump in and give a real quick what we're doing here? Before Dan just- Why do we have presentations on our agenda? We don't do this a lot. We don't give you a lot of education, other than by case, literally case by case, that's your education. And so we thought we had a short enough agenda. It's the end of the year, we have a new commissioner. Would it be a good time to start sprinkling in a little bit of information to build your base of knowledge? And that's really what we're trying to do. So Dan's going to go over our comprehensive plan, i.e. our land use and growth management plan. And you see that in your staff reports, but do we ever really talk about it a whole lot? So this will hopefully give you a little bit of background on that. And then I was going to walk through some of the development trends that we show our governing body every quarter. That's what you do. You review development, but what's some of the big picture? And it just may help. Again, build your basic knowledge for making decisions here. I apologize if, we hope it will, apologize if it doesn't, but we'll give it a go. It's informal. Thank you, Dan.
You betcha. Commissioners, this is a presentation that I gave at the Quad State Planning Conference in Tulsa about a month ago. It was part of this larger session devoted to comprehensive plan best practices. So this is a fairly short synthesized reminder of our land use and growth management plan. Want to orient you to Topeka, which you obviously are already, but so Topeka has platting authority out to 3 miles beyond the city limits. So you can see the city limits shaded there. So that cloud that's around the city is our 3-mile jurisdiction. Extraterritorial jurisdiction. We have platting authority in that 3 miles. We don't have zoning or building permits. It's platting authority, and it's that area outside the city that was the source of some of the consternation that was behind our comp plan update. A little history for you. Harlan Bartholomew and Associates completed a comprehensive plan for Topeka and Shawnee County in 1940. There was a statement that I want to read to you here. There's been a pronounced shifting of the population near the outskirts of Topeka into the unincorporated areas of Shawnee County. It has caused appreciation of the value of residential property in the older parts of the city. It has proceeded to the point that, unless checked, the economic structure of the entire community will be seriously endangered. So this statement that we found kind of early on in our process resonated with us because the gist of our update and what we were trying to promote here was this fiscal responsibility, and here we are in 1940, this idea of the economic structure being endangered by the development that was happening outside the city was something that we were also talking about. Alas, nothing really happened after the 1940 comp plan to change anything, so we fast forward to 1995. Planners decided to go ahead and change the subdivision regulations outside the city. This is a story that appeared in the Capital Journal in 1995. Here are some of the statements in there. The Planning Commission's a kangaroo court, sounds like communism. So 500 people came to these hearings, and needless to say, nothing was changed. It stayed the way it was. So we fast forward again to 2012. City hosted an EPA Technical Assistance for Sustainable Communities workshop. The theme of that workshop was planning for economic and fiscal health. The recommendation out of that workshop was to update our comp plan to align land development and infrastructure policies with the city's economic and fiscal health goals. So here we are again, we're talking about economic and fiscal health back to 1940. So this is typically the part of the presentation that we do for the land use growth management plan, where we go on and on about all the data that we collected. And so we usually have about 30 minutes we devote to this presentation. We're going to shorten it up for you here and just show you three things. There's images at the bottom of that slide are screenshots from the video that we put together. So the image on the left are the 5 services that the city provides to its residents. So it's police, fire, water, sewer, and roads. The image in the middle is a density heat map for Topeka. So the darker red colors are the densest residential areas, and as you move out towards the edge of the city, the blues and the darker blues are the least dense. I have a statistic that relates to that slide. Since 1960, Topeka has increased its land area by 65%, but its population by only 7%. So what happens then is, so we've built all these roads and water lines and sewer lines, and we don't have near the people to pay for them that we used to. So it puts a stress on the city's fiscal health. The image on the right is historical new residential versus demolished residential. So the red dots are the demos and the blue dots are the new residential, and you can see most of those are on the edge of the city and outside the city. So, so this presentation touches on best practices and lessons learned. I'll talk about the technical advisory team, the public engagement that we went through, and our policy and rule changes. Then Bill will come back and talk about how we are tracking the progress. So our technical advisory team was a group of developers, architects, realtors, and engineers. Actually, Mr. Kalp was on that technical advisory team back in the day. So that team was put together to be a technical advisory team on subdivision regulations, annexation, those sorts of things. So they did that job. But they also kind of gave us credibility going forward in the rest of our process, because that's a group that's not necessarily on our side, so to speak, all the time. So it really gave us some good credibility. So the next few slides are the public engagement. So in addition to the public meetings that we had, we also wanted people to be able to put their comments in online. So this question was identify specific locations for infill redevelopment investment that support an economically sustainable footprint. The idea here is they could pin their comments to a map online, and here are some of the comments that we got back on that question. So revitalize the downtown area, redevelop older commercial areas. Another question was, how can Topeka grow in an economically sustainable manner? So this wasn't a multiple choice question, this was fill out your thoughts on that question. So here are the results here. So the first one, quit supplying water outside the city, reinvest in the core, create incentives, take care of old problems first, focus inward. So I guess the neat thing about this was the comments that we were getting really were tracking with what we were trying to promote here through this update. Okay, so the big thing that we did that made our lives a little easier was created a video. So our City 4 staff put together this video. The city has a YouTube channel, so if you go to the city's YouTube channel, you can find this video, just search for Land Use and Growth Management. It's 8 minutes long. If you haven't watched it, I suggest you do. It's pretty interesting, we think. So the challenge of the video was to tell a story but not get lost in the details. So the video does a real good job of kind of explaining the why we were going through this update. I think it's also helpful that, there's a few people that weren't super happy with what we were proposing, and I think at least if they watch the video, they can understand the why we were doing what we were doing. So policy and rule changes, the lesson here was we adopted the rule changes with the policy at the same time. We didn't bring the Planning Commission a policy and then the plat rules and all that 6 months later. Did not make any sense to wait. So the particular change here that's important to note, the image on the bottom left is So the circled in white is the previously approved development pattern, so to speak. So if you had 3 acres and 200 feet of frontage, you could create a lot outside the city without the city looking at it. Even though the city had planning authority outside the city, it was a planning exemption for 3 acres, 200 feet of frontage. And what that creates is a piano key pattern of development that will never turn into the urban development that's circled in blue on that image is also. So the whole reason for changing the subdivision rules outside the city was to allow more of that urban type development that's in blue rather than that piano key that will not happen. And then the image on the right is the city's extended in the past water lines and sewer lines outside the city, really exacerbated a kind of a sprawl, what we call a rural residential sprawl development pattern outside the city. This plan does not encourage or recommend, in most cases, an extension of sewer or water outside the city any longer. So in 2015, we adopted this plan, update to our land use and growth management plan. It talks about compact development, investing in place, return on investment. And then the statement here is fiscally responsible growth happens where Topeka has already invested. So to that end, we created an urban growth area for Topeka. And the existing city limits is our top priority, our tier 1 for urban development, because we've made the sewer, water, fire, police, those investments in the city already. So any redevelopment we can capture in the city is our top priority to take advantage of those investments in that infrastructure. The urban growth area outside the city is that green, kind of that green boundary, light green. That is where we changed the planning exemption from 3 acres to 20 acres. And then, so how do we do? You remember the 1995 subdivision hearings. We had this editorial about 3/4 of the way through our process, and basically suggesting that our focusing on internal growth was appropriate and made a lot of sense, sound strategy. So definitely this update resonated much better than it did in 1995. So that's it.
Who else watched the video? Okay, that's fine. Bill's in it.
It's pretty good.
It's really good.
If we said it was an award-winning video, would you watch it?
Tomorrow morning.
It is.
You said it's only 8 minutes long?
8 minutes.
8 minutes long. Yeah, that actually won a statewide award, planning award from the Kansas chapter of the American Planning Association. That was our first ever award that I'm aware of. And the award was for New Horizon Award, I think innovation. And since then, I see a lot more people doing videos. So I don't know. It came out of, it was the mother of necessity. We just had to do something to get across some of these complex ideas. So, and if you notice tonight, we referred to the neighborhood plan. We did not refer to the land use and growth management plan. The neighborhood plan and the 12, 13, 14 plans that we do have for the those are the official plans. They are the official elements for that particular neighborhood. So they are part of our comprehensive plan. If you're not in a neighborhood area that has a plan, then you refer back to our land use growth management plan for direction in terms of land use. So just, and that is something we are, through decisions that are made here and on the council, we may need to update from time to time, and we would bring that back to you if any changes to reflect that. So unless there's any questions, I'll just.
Commissioner Klopp, did you have another question?
Thank you. I had a comment about Mr. Warner's presentation on that. make reference to the 1995 debacle. I was on the old city-county planning commission when that was underway, and I was on the subdivision committee. And it was, you don't like to have an empty room here, but you also don't want to have 500 irate people. And it was an ordeal because there wasn't adequate communication and buy-in from the community. There wasn't enough outreach. So the fact that it was successful, a very important change in the regulations that you all did, is you'd be commended for making that happen, because it was an impossible situation in 1995. It was very bad. We were called communists and Nazis by the same people in the same sentence, the same night. So.
So our performance measures did not to be called communist or Nazi, so I hope we're doing.
We're both.
We're both. Yeah, together is really bad. Okay, so this is something we show our governing body every quarter. It is called our Development and Growth Management Report. Okay, so they won't know.
Unless we were at the governing body last Tuesday.
Yes, you could give this presentation. Maybe you should. What we should be doing, as I just checked, is including you on our DGM report. We put this out every month, and then we do a quarterly report in front of the governing body. Every month, you see these sort of trends and track the activity for permits. You really should be on the list that gets this. So we'll add you to this, but here's your introduction tonight. Suffice to say, we try to cover, again, what our development and building permit trends are and measure some of our growth management policies. This, beginning here, you can, since you may or may not have ever seen this, this shows our building permit totals. And on the far right is the current year. And you can see we started measuring in 2000, 20 years ago, and you can see there was a decided drop-off around 2008. I'm sure why. But since then, our building permit totals have more or less leveled off in over that time, but we are trending way up. Not way up. We're trending up with our building permit activity. We're up 9% over last year and 6% over the last 5-year average. Not a huge jump, but what has, and the blue line on that chart is commercial permits. The red line is residential. Or do I have that?
Map says it otherwise.
Yeah.
No, that's right. Okay, so yes, sorry. I'm having color issues. The commercial is the red line, and historically they've always issued fewer commercial building permits than residential. We had 1 year, a couple years ago, where it got really close, where they were there was more commercial. So over the years, commercial has underperformed, at least in terms of total permits, in residential. However, these last couple of years, and in particular this year, 2019, we measure the permit value. And we've been doing that again for the last 20 years. If we end the year at the same pace that we started these first 3 quarters, we would have the highest total value of building permits that we've ever had since we've started recording. It is largely driven by commercial activity. And when I say commercial activity, that could include residential, multifamily. It just doesn't include the single family and 2-family. So everything above that is considered commercial. permits. So we are on.
So is that everything above M1? Since we're discussing that?
Yes. So that is a good way to put it. So we are going gangbusters here with the size of our, and the scale of our activity, development activity this year. If you look at it from a square footage standpoint, we're also going to be either the second, probably the third highest we've been in the last 20 years if we keep going on this pace. So we're 75% from above last year in terms of our total square footage on the building permits. So these are large scale investments. Commercial permits themselves are up. As I said, they're largely driving this trend, 22% over last year and 17% over the last 5 years average. So a lot of commercial activity in the city, and most of that is rehab, remodel. I'd say probably on a 2-to-1 basis. There's probably for every 2 remodel or rehab commercial permits, there is a new construction or addition commercial permit. So that's good. These are good things, a lot of activity. When you break down to where those are happening, the two biggest engines of that commercial growth, one is downtown. We've got about 16% of all commercial permits are in downtown this year, with 8.5% of value. Contrast that the downtown is only 3% of the land area for the city, so they're pushing out, 5 times their weight in the number of permits for the city. When you look at the other concentration of commercial permits, I-470 West corridor, you see a similar concentration. Permits are 22% of all commercial permits happen in that corridor, and the permit value is a quarter of all commercial permits, which is amazing. When you put both of those areas together, they are a third of all commercial permit value is happening in those 2 areas for the city. So a third value and almost 40% in the number of permits. Yes?
So the 470 corridors, that include the Wheatfield Village?
It does. It goes, extends from about 10th on Wanamaker and follows I-470 down to 29 and includes about half a mile on either side. A lot of significant projects that happen, including Wheatfield, the Kmart renovation. There's continual Topeka ER that's going in right now. And so anyway, that's kind of the first time we put a lens on where this was happening. And together, you're talking about 3 to 4 times in what we would have in land area, 3 to 4 times land area, they're pushing out in the number of permits or their value. So they are definitely carrying their weight, without a doubt. When you pivot over to residential permits are relatively flat compared to last year or the last 5-year average. However, when we get into the number of units, the number of units are also relatively flat compared to last year and the last 5-year averages. So if you look at the number of new units, we average generally 120 unit range. That's exactly what we're projecting by the end of this year. Most of those are multifamily. When I say most of those, I'd say less than half are going to end up being with single family or 2-family nature, M1 or lower. But we are also had experienced a couple of new developments that have not come forth yet either. So we would expect those to carry over into next year. All right. Now, where are those happening is another important question we ask as part of our growth management policies. So we measure of all the new housing units in the county, how many are happening in the city, how many are outside the city. By Dan's presentation, you can see we're trying to encourage, again, for development to follow where the infrastructure already is, which is by and large within the city, those 5 services. So we hope to see this continue to rise up. Right now, at this point of 2019, we're at 54%, and that is a 9% increase from last year. So 54% of all new units this year have occurred in the city. And that is, again, a trend that's going in the right direction as we try to become a more fiscally responsible or show fiscally responsible development patterns, so we don't have to extend lines and streets and police and fire.
Mr. Fyander, we have a question.
Question.
Quick question, the breakout here of the county, the share of the city versus the county, is there another breakout for how much of that's within the 3-mile extraterritorial area? Is there any feel for where that missing 46% or that other 46% might be?
Yes, Commissioner Kaup, we do track that. It's in the it's in the monthly report that I don't have here, but I do recall the area within the UGA, which is the roughly mile or so outside of the city, trending in that there's much fewer lots being developed in the UGA compared to the city's share. And I'd say outside of the UGA, within the 3-mile area, it is, there's not a lot of difference right now. It's about the same percentage share this year as it was last year.
Are you seeing any trend on that?
Yeah, the main trend is there aren't, and you know probably because we haven't brought you any major plats of subdivisions outside the city, but you don't have a lot of, if any, new subdivisions being created outside the city. You do have a lot of already platted lots that are getting built on. So that's something that's a bit out of they've already been approved to be built on, and so that will happen. But what you don't see, and what we are sort of hitting the next slide here, is we do a lot inventory, and we keep track of, this will give you some idea. Within the city itself, we track how many, what we call buildable prime vacant lots. Those are lots that have been platted since 1970, and they have streets are already in, or they have a benefit district approved to put streets and utilities in. And of that, these are vacant, platted, prime buildable lots. We've got 628. That equates, if you do the math, for how many single and two-family units are built a year in the city, that equates to about 8.3 years of lot inventory for single and two-family. The trend is not to see a lot more single and two-family in the city. You're seeing more multifamily repurposing of buildings. Certainly downtown is coming online with a lot new units in that regard, and we expect for that to continue. But we don't have, we don't have a lot problem. We don't have a lack of platted lot problem within the city. We don't have that outside the city. There's certainly a lot of inventory to build on. So that is not the issue. The issue is very similar to other localities. As you can see from a national standpoint, there's just not a lot of inventory, even existing homes that are being put on the market where we're half the national average for how many homes we have listed on our real estate market right now. So, that being said, we don't really want to open up new areas for brand-new extensions of roads and water and sewer and annex those into the city until we see that number come down. We'd like, ideally, 8+ years. It's a pretty high number. If you knock a few years off of that, then you might want to start planning more for opening up new areas or looking at areas that you can redevelop. Right now, again, the trends are not for infinite single-family growth. That was kind of a child of the pre-recession. We have not seen that continue on the scale it did at that time. Sir?
How do you do this calculation for 8.32 years? What does that mean?
So if you take the 628, which is the number of lots we have that could be built on right now, and you divide that by the average number of single-family and two-family lots that we have every year, and I'm permits, right. So single and two-family permits a year are going to be 628 divided by 8.32. So that tells you our average single and two-family permit per year. And I don't have that off the top of my head.
76.
Okay, there we go. And the trend is to see less and less of that, actually.
77.
77 one single and two-family permits a year, or units a year.
Do we have a mechanism in place for tracking new household formation?
We do not. The households are going to be measured at the census. A household is typically a housing unit. It should be. So we do track how many units we have in comparison to households. We do track that. So we have, I think, for every household in Topeka, we have 1.08 or 1.08 housing units, which means we have about an 8% vacancy, if that's all true. So what we track is you really want to have a little tighter, less vacancy and not so many you don't want to be overbuilt. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what you're seeing. We overplatted, overbuilt in many regards through the 2000s, and now we're trying to absorb all that and bring that online, and it's taking a while.
The number of vacant lots, is that for inside the city limits, or is that inside within the 3 mile zone?
It's just the city limits.
City limits?
Yeah.
Do you know what it is in the zone?
Pardon me?
Do you know what the number is in the zone?
We do have a number. It's in the most recent Shawnee County Comprehensive Plan. They did track that. It's in the thousands. Yeah. We can get that for you. Yeah, that's, I don't want to misquote that, but it's in the thousands. Anything else? I've got a couple more things, and actually this just gives you, we go over the top 10 permits by value with council, and this, again, there's no shocking stuff here. It's just some very large projects, and this is just the third quarter. This is not a year to date. So we have, for instance, Washburn Indoor Athletic Facility. That's a $16 million project. That was the highest value. The Stormville Event Center is actually more than 16 minutes. It's like 22 all told, with the different phases that they're doing. So that is another large development. In Wheatfield Village, this is showing the Spring Hill Suites. That was permitted in the third quarter. This is the fourth of 5 buildings down there. And so again, some large-scale development. Topeka ER, I mentioned that 17th and Arvonia is going in. That is under construction now. And then, of course, we have a McDonald's rebuild. We've done, I think, every one of those now. So those were the top 5 permit values that we had in the third quarter. And we share that with you. We have a top 10 at the end of the year. And I would expect, as you saw from the graph, I mean, we're over 200. We're going to be over 200. We project 215 million in permit value, which is just ridiculous compared to anything we've had in the past. So a lot of perfect storms happening, a lot of convergence, a lot of good development. And as you notice, not all of these are private development, but they will stir, like the Washburn Center will stir more events and bring more tax revenue to the city, which is a good thing, even though it doesn't spin off any property taxes. So I think, so I think that's it. If you ever want to look at more of this, all you have to do is Google DGM Reports Topeka, and it'll bring you right to our page where we have all the monthly reports. So hopefully from time to time we can do this with you. If you find this, unless I get some, stares or behind the scene comments, we don't have to do this every month, but we will add you to the list so you can at least see it and keep up to date with it. Sir?
Somebody's building 2 large earthen berms at southeast corner of Huntoon and Wanamaker. Is there a commercial permit with that corner going on?
Is that where the Coyote Canyon was?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Is it car wash?
Is it car wash?
The car wash.
Yeah, they've applied.
Yeah.
I hope this is public information.
Otherwise, they just got in trouble.
The site plan review is completed.
For car wash.
Yeah, I don't know where we're at on building permits.
Okay.
Apparently that-
Well, they've applied for a site plan review, and they're moving into development mode here, hopefully.
Very
soon.
large car wash.
It's a very large car wash.
Hey.
Ooh.
There for lunch.
Thank you, that was informative and helpful, so thank you.
Yep.
I think so too.
Good.
Well, good. I know you, everything you wanted to know about development and planning, and we're afraid to ask, so we tried.
With that being said, are there any other communications to the commission that we need to know about?
No, just welcome Commissioner Count, welcome back Commissioner Count.
Yes, welcome back. All right, with that, I would move to adjourn. Anyone object?
Second.
Okay.
Dan, next month, history of the SID and its history of the
Preservation.
cooperation with.